So, shall we go on to the next?
Let's do, yes.
I like this photo very much, and I think we featured it on in our Kristallnacht program, but I didn't get to talk about this lady so much and her baby. She was born on March 3rd, 1940, in Amiens. Her mother was a refugee in Amiens, one of about a dozen refugees that we've been able to identify there. And she gave birth to her name was Silly, probably short for Cecilia, but Cilly, Affenkraut, a German name. She was born in Leipzig, Germany. So Silly came to France probably in 1933, I think that was the date. And but the refugees, most of them were in Amiens from 1938 to 1940. The baby, his name was Edith. And that was her second, well, actually her third child, but the second that was with her in Amiens. And the only, as I said, the only child, refugees to be born among this group of refugees. So as I said, Silly was born in Leipzig. And there were a couple of Germans, but mostly Austrians, in fact, because after the annexation of Austria by the Germans in 1938, in March, that precipitated a flight to other countries. And a lot of the refugees, of the dozen or so, were coming from Vienna. But Silly was one of the few who came from Germany. And she was, at the time, I guess in this picture taken, 31 years old. And the baby, okay, this is one of the reasons I like this photo a lot, is the baby, the mother was deported, okay? The baby survived. Her sister, and her older sister, Liliane, also survived. And the baby grew up and became a brainiac, or above the normal in the cerebral department, whatever you want to say. She wrote a book on German philosophy and its corruption and how it contributed to Nazism. I don't think it's been translated. It's a big book. It was so big, I wanted to take it with me, but I couldn't because of the overweight requirements on the plane. I had to leave a lot of things behind. The thing about Silly was, I got in touch with her through one of these other people in this informal study group who knew something she had written and apparently had emailed her. And I started emailing her, and eventually I asked her if she would like to come to Amiens and give a presentation, small presentation at the commemorative ceremony for the Veldiv in Amiens. So I think I mentioned that the Paris Roundup of July 1942 is commemorated obligatorily all over France now. And each locality, well, I guess of a certain size, has a commemorative service. So I persuaded Silly to come back there. And part of the reason, not Silly, Edith, I'm sorry, Edith, the daughter.
Edith is the daughter.
So she did come back, and part of my thinking was the refugees are people that are not well attended to in the collective memory. I think I described that before as the birds on the telegraph wire or telephone wire. So I thought that her presence there might, help reconnect that piece. And it still needs work to be reconnected, because the refugees, as I also mentioned, were left out of the memorial plaque that the Jewish community put together just after the war, even though they were on the list of people who were known to have been in the Jews who were known to have been in the town. The photograph also sort of supplies a connection with the first picture in that Silly, Affenkraut, and some of the other refugees, or most of them, were supported by the philanthropic committee of the synagogue during their time in Amiens. They were asked, all of the Jews were asked in November of 1940, when the Germans had already been installed there, to explain what their economic assets were and how they, managed to live. So we know that a lot of them mentioned that they had been subsidized by the Comité Juif, the Jewish Philanthropic Committee. So now the refugees were only there for a short time. They appear on the census and a few other census of Jews in a few other places, but they were expelled in early December 1940, and they were sent either to camps or they floated on somehow or other toward Paris, where they tried to avoid, what came down eventually, especially starting in 1942 when the deportations began in earnest.
So let me ask you for clarification. The refugees in Amiens were expelled and other Jews in Amiens were able to stay in December 1940?
Correct. Yep. They also expelled a number of Polish non-Jews around that time too. As I say, Silly and one other woman there were sent to a concentration camp inside France. They call them concentration. They're not the killing camps that were established in the East, but France had a whole network of labor camps that were set up initially to accommodate the refugees, Republican, no relation to today's Republican, refugees from the Spanish Civil War. They fled into France, and they were hosted in these camps, and then they also became reception centers for Jews and other groups from which they didn't get escape. I mean, Silly eventually was sent to one of the alternate camps, not Drancy, but Pithiviers, which was a place that held some Jews before Drancy became the almost exclusive center. And she was deported from there in July 1942. I just realized something which I didn't think of at the time. When I invited Edith Fuchs, was her name, back, daughter, the little baby, and author, back to Amiens to speak at the Veldiv commemoration. Her mother, it turns out, I'm looking at this, was deported on July 17th, 1942, which in the middle of the 2 days of Veldiv. I didn't realize that at the time. But okay, well, that's when I'm going to stop there with the refugees. Do you have any other questions about that, Lauren?
That's such a good example. So thank you for picking that photograph to talk about, because we get into the story of these refugees from the East who were in Amiens, and the baby survives, which is never expected. That's always a better outcome than I expect when I look at a photograph from 1940 of Jewish people in France. But also that now you've connected Silly to the Veldiv is very, very powerful.
One other thing I noticed, Edith, the baby, grown-up baby, contributed some photographs to the departmental archives in Amiens, and they're now online there. And one of the photos shows her and Edith's father. Apparently, they were able to get together briefly in Amiens in 1939. And the other thing about that is there's a photo of her with her older sister and 3 younger brothers in Leipzig, where she grew up. And there's some notations about what happened to the other members of the family. Her older sister came to the United States and escaped the worst. And her 3 brothers, one went to England. I think that's where she got the photos from. The other said, the note says he escaped from one of the camps. Don't know any more about that. And the third one was sent to, was wound up in the Warsaw Ghetto, the third brother. So this is something else that I want to. I'm glad I pressed on a little bit here, because this whole tendency to treat people as isolates is it bothers me, and I want to join them to other people, because
Right.
that's even leaving aside the community, Jewish community thing there, which was important.
Well, there's the family, and this is also something that gets lost when we think about 6 million, or
Right.
and
Right.
when we think about individuals isolated, that, you do have entire families and they're doing what they can to survive. So you have the example you give really illustrates this. One sibling makes it to the United States, one sibling makes it to England, one can't get out, one ends up in the Warsaw Ghetto, Silly is in Amiens. And this is a reality
Right.
for families in this time, that
Mhm.
escape was very difficult. And if you could, you went where you could. Wow,
Right.
this is fascinating. Thank you for developing these points about each photograph. Wow.